If you believe courage doesn't always shout, but often whispers in the quiet corners of forgotten places, make sure to like and subscribe, because some stories deserve to be seen, even when no one's watching. It started like any other routine transfer at Fort Halcyon, a sprawling naval base tucked away from prying eyes and public acclaim, where the walls held secrets deeper than most dared to uncover. Lieutenant Ella Rivers, 28, stepped off the transport vehicle with the weight of skepticism already pressing down on her shoulders. Her presence wasn't announced with fanfare. No medals gleamed on her uniform. No commanding officers stood at attention. She was simply another name on a roster, another face shuffled in, another transfer destined to blend into the gray bureaucracy of base life. But they didn't see what mattered. The senior officers exchanged glances laced with thinly veiled judgment. Whispers circled like vultures in the briefing room before she even had a chance to speak. "Intel specialist," they said, almost dismissively. "Fresh transfer from a remote unit." Probably overstated her role. Lieutenant Mark Davison, known for his sharp wit and sharper tongue, chuckled louder than most, drawing other junior officers into his circle of mockery. The tone was familiar, a kind of dismissal reserved for those too quiet to demand attention, for those whose past wasn't neatly cataloged in public reports or press releases. They didn't know about her service in the shadows. The missions classified under layers of secrecy, never spoken of in official channels. The nights spent tracking enemy communications from dusty bunkers overseas, under moonless skies, where every intercepted signal was a whisper of life or death. The scars weren't visible, but they were there, etched into the way she moved, how her eyes never wandered aimlessly, how every step seemed calculated, purposeful. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. It was a place where bravado was currency, where medals worn over the chest were meant to be louder than silence. And Ella Rivers, without any of that, sat in the back row, her posture steady, her expression unreadable, like a storm gathering beneath still waters. As the lieutenant commander, a man whose presence demanded authority, stepped up to the podium, the room began to murmur. He was known for favoring the traditional, for viewing every newcomer through the lens of hierarchy and rank. His voice began the usual spiel: base protocol, upcoming drills, expected threats. But the air in the room seemed heavier than usual, as though holding its breath. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Without hesitation, the lieutenant commander turned his gaze directly toward Ella and said, "Oracle, lead the briefing." A ripple of stunned silence swept across the room. Lips parted, eyes widened, heads tilted in disbelief. The nickname, Oracle, was neither official nor self-proclaimed. It wasn't something broadcast in her service record. No one knew the origin, and yet, in that instant, it carried undeniable weight. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't derision. It was command. Ella rose, unhurried, as if the title had been waiting for her all along. She approached the terminal with the precision of a veteran who had operated in far more dangerous theaters than this room of polished desks and murmuring officers. Her fingers didn't tremble. They moved deftly, tapping into secure networks, unlocking encrypted files, parsing intelligence data in real time. Her voice was clear, low, and assured. "If the perimeter firewall fails at Sector Delta 4, she began, and the intrusion signature matches Protocol 3BR-07. Every officer, including Lieutenant Davison, who had been the loudest skeptic moments ago, leaned in, their faces slowly shifting from derision to rapt attention. She outlined threat vectors, exposure risks, and contingency responses, each solution backed by data only someone who lived in code and secrecy could command. There was no grandstanding, no flourish of medals, just facts, numbers, precise commands delivered with unwavering confidence. It was the kind of performance that didn't invite applause, because it wasn't meant to. It was designed to be efficient, effective, and above all, invisible, just like her service had always been. Yet while the lieutenant commander nodded approvingly, the undercurrent of judgment from the other officers began to falter. Murmurs dissolved into silence, replaced by quick, whispered calculations. A young cadet, Alex Monroe, watched intently, his eyes brimming with the kind of wonder reserved for moments when the ordinary suddenly reveals the extraordinary. Mark Davison, once so certain, now looked unsettled, his mouth parted as though about to argue, but no words came. What no one knew, what no one had dared to ask, was that the nickname, Oracle, was not given lightly. It was a title earned in the field, during a mission cloaked in the kind of secrecy that left no room for recognition, only consequence. A mission where Ella had single-handedly intercepted and neutralized an enemy's attempt to cripple a forward communications array, preventing what could have been one of the deadliest cyber attacks in modern history. She'd done it alone, unacknowledged, her actions classified beyond public record, buried beneath layers of official silence. But today, that silence cracked. As the briefing continued, Ella Rivers remained calm, deliberate, never seeking acknowledgement, only ensuring the room understood the threat and how to contain it. Every term she used, every protocol she referenced, came from hard-earned experience, a lifetime spent listening to signals that whispered rather than shouted, noticing threats no one else was trained to see. When the briefing ended, the lieutenant commander didn't give her a public commendation. No medals were pinned, no ceremonies arranged. Instead, he simply nodded, almost imperceptibly, and moved on to the next order of business, leaving the officers to process what had just unfolded. But the air lingered differently now. In the weeks that followed, whispers began to circulate through the base. Quiet cadets approached her in the hallways with questions, subtle and respectful. Officers once dismissive began to glance her way with something resembling admiration. And then, in the shadows of a forgotten storage room, a locked metal box sat, sealed since 1972, its surface worn and untarnished, like a relic awaiting rediscovery. Someone finally opened it. Inside lay medals no one at Fort Halcyon had ever seen, each one marked with symbols of classified operations, awarded in secrecy, never meant for public display. Beneath them rested a single letter, yellowed and folded precisely, signed by a general, a silent acknowledgement of service that no rank or title could fully encapsulate. Ella Rivers didn't speak of it. She didn't need to, because some stories don't ask to be told. They are carried quietly, revealed only when the world finally chooses to listen. Weeks passed since the briefing, and the weight of that moment had settled over Fort Halcyon like a quiet reckoning. The nickname, Oracle, circulated softly among the officers, uttered with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and disbelief. Not openly, of course. Fort Halcyon was not a place of grand declarations or sudden applause. It was a bastion of discipline, where reputation was built in silence, action, and endurance, not words. Ella Rivers moved through the base with that same calm precision she'd carried into the briefing room. Her steps were steady, her eyes always scanning, always measuring. She didn't seek attention, and none was offered. But something subtle had changed. Cadets who once ignored her presence now offered brief nods of recognition. Officers once quick to dismiss her began to hold their gazes a moment longer, their posture just a fraction straighter when they passed. The lieutenant commander never repeated the command publicly. No memo arrived. No official commendation was added to her service file. Yet, the unspoken shift was unmistakable. She had become the unacknowledged cornerstone of base security, an invisible force whose precision was not questioned anymore. It was during one of the weekly simulations, a cyber attack drill meant to test the facility's defenses, that her expertise was revealed in full. The scenario was built to fail. A sudden, simulated breach rattled the base's control room. Lights flickered. Alarm sirens wailed in sharp, intermittent bursts. The officers on duty scrambled, shouting technical jargon that quickly fell into panic. Automated protocols stalled. Red warning lights blinked without coordination. It should have been chaos. But Ella Rivers didn't hesitate. She sat down at the central terminal, her fingers moving fluidly, entering commands faster than any protocol allowed. No one interrupted. No one offered suggestions or tried to outpace her. Instead, the room watched, as if the right answer had already been written in the way she held herself. Firewalls compromised Sector 7B. Attempted access signature matches IP Vector 3X, she announced softly, her voice unshaken. Her eyes narrowed on the data feed, tracing the simulated intruder's digital footsteps with the same care as a veteran following real threats. Within minutes, she isolated the breach, rerouted data flow, and reinstated security layers that had been failing for hours. The simulation ceased, silence replacing alarm. The lieutenant commander stood at the back, observing, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Ella didn't avoid his gaze. Her eyes met his steadily, without challenge, without apology. She simply returned to monitoring the terminal, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Cadet Alex Monroe stepped forward hesitantly. His voice was low but earnest. "Oracle, how did you catch that?" We were all scrambling to patch the firewalls blindly. Ella glanced at him for a brief second, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her features. Then she answered, not condescending, but matter of fact. "Because I listened when no one else did." It wasn't a boast. It wasn't pride. Just a statement of fact. That same day, in a small, cluttered office near the command center, a young communications officer discreetly snapped a photograph of the terminal screen showing Ella's command line interface in full operation. Along with it, he captured a side profile of her, calm, composed, unyielding. Without a word, the photo was posted to the base's internal forum under the caption, "Who is Oracle?" Intel Specialist Rivers stopped the worst-case scenario today without so much as a badge flash. The post spread like quiet wildfire. By the end of the afternoon, whispers had turned to questions. Is she really that good? Where did she even come from? Why have we never heard of her before? Nobody dared ask directly. That wasn't how things worked at Fort Halcyon. The lieutenant commander, perhaps aware of the shifting atmosphere, said nothing. But in private moments, he reviewed the logs with a meticulous eye. Every command she entered, every firewall she rebuilt, every protocol she overridden, it was clean, elegant, efficient. More than that, it was precise. Ella Rivers, whose record was sparse beyond a few classified missions, carried herself with a deliberate humility. She did not speak of the battles fought in silence. She never mentioned the nights spent alone, decoding enemy chatter as entire units counted on her discretion. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke. Later that evening, as the base returned to its steady hum of regulated life, a small group of cadets gathered in the common room. Quiet conversations turned toward her. "She doesn't look like a hero," one murmured. "She doesn't act like one," said another. "But she saved us all," Alex Monroe replied softly. Far from the spotlight, Ella sat in the corner, reading a technical manual, the weight of her legacy just beneath the surface. She never acknowledged their words. No smile, no nod. Because true strength, she knew, was not about being seen. It was about knowing you were there when no one else was. And while others waited for recognition, someone finally opened the old metal box that had been sealed for decades, tucked away in the archives. Inside were medals of such obscure origin, they seemed almost otherworldly. Insignia awarded in secret operations, never discussed, never displayed. Beneath them, a letter signed by a general. Its words, simple yet profound, acknowledged the sacrifices of someone who never sought glory, someone whose duty was measured in quiet precision. The letter read, "To those whose names history forgets, we owe our vigilance. Their service is not measured in rank, but in unwavering commitment. Let this testament endure." Ella didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to, because at Fort Halcyon, they had already begun to remember. The weeks stretched into months, and the subtle shift in atmosphere at Fort Halcyon did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. The nickname, Oracle, lingered, no longer whispered with doubt or derision, but spoken with a cautious reverence. Officers who had once dismissed Ella Rivers now found themselves glancing her way, uncertain how to reconcile the woman who carried no medals with the precision of a battle-hardened strategist. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon that the true measure of her influence revealed itself. The base was preparing for a high-level strategic exercise, a simulated full-scale attack designed to test every department from communications to ground defense. Expectations ran high, and tensions simmered beneath the surface as officers and cadets scrambled to fulfill their assigned roles. The lieutenant commander stood at the head of the operations room, his face set in practiced authority. He looked over the assembled staff, scanning the room for the usual nods of confidence, the expected assurances that protocols were in place. But something was wrong. A critical comms relay failed. The simulated enemy signal began to overwhelm the base's firewalls, sending fragmented data packets across unsecured channels. The screens flickered, and uncertainty rippled through the room like a low tremor. Ella Rivers did not rise in panic. Her fingers moved over the terminal as though it were second nature, tracing the intrusion's digital path with an uncanny precision only years of experience could sharpen. Without hesitation, she initiated a series of commands, rebuilding firewalls, rerouting encrypted channels, isolating compromised access points. The digital breach, designed to collapse the simulation, was instead folded back in on itself, neutralized before it could escalate further. Sector Delta, 4 secured, she reported, her voice steady and calm. Intrusion vector contained. Rerouting all external communications through secured relay 12B. The lieutenant commander didn't speak at first. His eyes remained fixed on the data feed, scanning the terminal's clean, unassailable logs that detailed every step she had taken. No one else moved. No one else spoke. They waited. Then, the unthinkable happened. A young security analyst, previously skeptical, approached her quietly, almost in awe. "How did you know it would behave that way?" he asked, his voice low. Ella's eyes met his. There was no pride, only clarity. "Because I anticipated it," she said simply. "I knew the timing of the vector's shift matched patterns I've seen before." It wasn't a boast. It was fact. Years of silent observation, of knowing when the enemy moved not because they shouted, but because they whispered. Later that evening, when the exercise was declared a success and the officers began to file out of the operations room, a different kind of recognition began to take root. The lieutenant commander approached her, his face softer than before, no longer wrapped in condescension but tinged with a quiet understanding. He didn't offer medals or promotions. Instead, he offered something far rarer, a nod of genuine respect. "Intel Specialist Rivers," he said, voice deliberate. "You don't need to prove your value anymore. We all see it now." Ella accepted the nod without a word. It wasn't about public acclaim. It was never about being seen. Her strength had never come from validation. It came from the certainty that in moments where decisions were measured in milliseconds, where lives balanced on the edge of a command, her silence, her experience, was the only thing standing between order and chaos. Days later, the photograph of Ella Rivers leading the defense during the simulated breach continued to circulate through the base's internal network. But it no longer carried a question. It was an unspoken testament. Her colleagues didn't treat her differently out of obligation or guilt. They treated her differently because they finally understood what it meant to lead when no one was watching. And then, something unexpected happened. The metal box sealed since 1972, discovered months before, containing medals and the letter from a general, was quietly moved from the archives to the base's small museum. No announcement, no ceremony, no public display of grandeur. Just a simple plaque mounted nearby, in memory of those who lead in silence, unknown, unseen, unyielding. Ella Rivers never stood beneath that plaque. Instead, she continued to walk the base, coffee in hand, her steps measured and deliberate. Her presence was no longer questioned. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Her hands never trembled. Alex Monroe, now a junior officer, found himself watching her more often. He admired the way she paused before every decision, how she traced the architecture of the network with a surgeon's care, how her voice remained calm when the world around her teetered. One afternoon, he approached, voice soft and steady. "Oracle," he said. Ella looked up. A faint smile touched the corner of her lips, barely perceptible, yet genuine. "I'm learning," he added. She nodded once, simple and profound. "I'm not here to be seen," she said quietly. "I'm here to make sure they don't forget. Because in the end, the real victories are not marked by medals or headlines. They are measured by the quiet decisions made when no one else is looking, the ones that keep a legacy alive." And in the shadows of Fort Halcyon, where whispers had once carried doubt, the name Oracle now resonated as a reminder that true leadership isn't loud. It's steady, it's patient, and it's unwavering.